If you're a parent, teacher, or school leader, and you're sick and tired of the frustration, anger, and unfair treatment of children at high risk in our public schools, then perhaps it's time for all of us to do something about it. In this podcast, Dr. Almitra Berry brings you tips, tools, strategies, and tactics to build successful solutions while touching, moving, and inspiring all of us to transform our schools so that every child thrives. Here's your host, Dr. Berry.
Hey there, Equity Warriors. Today, I welcome Jeaneen Tang to the 3E podcast. With over 20 years of experience as a speech-language pathologist and a mother to a special needs son, she brings us some unique insights into early language development. Her book, and I love the title of this book, Play Dumb and Sabotage, is for parents, caregivers, and educators, and it works to revolutionize the approach to children's communication skills. So please join us today as we explore some strategies to empower young voices and potentially reduce the need for speech therapy. Janeen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Berry.
And I have to say, and I think I told you this when we first met, I'm very self-conscious about my speech whenever I'm speaking to someone who is a speech pathologist or speech language therapist. I start sort of editing in my head before I start to speak to make sure that my articulation is appropriate. But I'll try and relax.
I should also say that because I'm a speech therapist, and when people find that out, I am also self-conscious and being like, okay, I need to make sure that I articulate and don't slur my words. My mom, when she found out I was going to be a speech therapist, she was like, you're going to be a speech therapist, but you mumble all the time. And I'm like, oh, wow. Thanks, Mom.
Oh, isn't that interesting? The things that we do when we are self-monitoring. And I think maybe I wish I could do less self-monitoring, especially when I'm speaking in Spanish, which is not my primary language. And I'm so self-monitoring about everything that I say that I'm probably not learning as quickly as I'd like to operate in that language. But anyhow.
That's very brave of you to do that.
Yes. But I want to talk about you and your personal journey. So tell us a little bit how your experience as a mom of a child with special needs, how did that influence how you approach your work as a pathologist, and then also to motivate you to write Play Dumb and Sabotage?
Absolutely. So, I was a speech therapist way before I had my son, and coming from the therapist standpoint, I had one point of view, right, as a therapist. And then I had my child, Che, in 2012. And then you have a different look. You have this normal developing child that you have and you play with, and you're making sure that he's reaching his milestones and everything. And then, life deals you a tragedy, and he had a tragic fall from our bed at 13 months old and suffered a large brain bleed. And he had to have an emergency craniotomy, and a couple days later he had a stroke in the hospital. And we lived in the hospital for a couple months, so it was very traumatic, right? And it's something that I would not wish it upon anyone, any family, to have to go through that, because they thought we tried to hurt him intentionally, and they said that he might never walk or talk. So it was like this point in our lives where we had to really learn to pivot, right? And I remember before I even had my son years ago, when I was a new speech therapist, I loved my job. I loved working with kids. I loved, working with kids with disabilities and trying to figure out and problem solve and working with parents and teachers. But I was thankful that I did not have a child with a disability, because I was like, I love working with them, but I don't think I could be a parent of a child with a disability. And, the universe likes to play with you. And now I have a child with a disability. So it gave me a different point of view. It also gave me a new level of empathy, right?
Yeah,
because I can relate to other parents that have a child with a disability, and no disability is the same exactly, right?
No.
Every child is different. Every person is different. and to have the ability to now work with other children and families with this new perspective has really given me a greater depth and ability to relate and to make an impact and to have a greater level of trust too by these parents who, they feel that, no one can understand what they're going through.
Yeah.
And now, in a way, even though my child is disabled, now I have the ability to relate to them on a whole nother level that other therapists are not. And, my son, he's amazing. He's going to be 12 soon, and he's a middle schooler now. So it's a huge thing, He goes to a charter school here in Los Angeles, and, his team of special education teachers and therapists and his behavioral support team is really great. They really try to make him feel as included as possible and support him as the best they can. And it's a great feeling to have him be so, happy at school now. Yeah, he enjoys it. And now, I want to be able to spend as much time with him as possible, after school. I don't want to be working all day long, but I do want to create a greater impact on the world. And how I thought I could do that was through teaching, right? So I thought I would teach at a university, maybe part-time, and teach new therapists how to be better speech therapists or provide them strategies on how to work with kids. But I thought the best impact would be to focus on parents and caregivers and the general education staff, anybody who educates young children, because they are the ones who will be shaping the children's lives. And if you are able to teach the mass of people, then you can really focus on those kids who, need speech therapy, or even those. I think that there's a big population of children who need speech therapy that possibly would not have needed speech therapy if their parents and caregivers and educators were just trained a little bit better on the different strategies. Because a lot of these kids, like we see for early intervention, they're physically developed fine, cognitively they understand. They're just late talkers, and they just were provided for very well. People over anticipate what the child needs. I know what my child is crying about or grunting about or anything. And so a lot of stuff is done for children or babies and young children. And the opportunity for that child to really practice and communicate is not provided by those parents, because they want to be great parents. And I always tell the parents I work with, I'm like, you're a great parent, but you need to also let that child struggle a little bit, communicate more, and provide opportunities where they can practice. Just like any sport, you practice your free throws, repetition. It's the same thing with young children. You have to provide repetition for them to practice, asking for snacks, or, making choices, making decisions on their own, so they feel like they are part of the doing rather than things being always done for them.
Yeah. You made me think about my son, who's my second child. His sister is right at 5 years older than him, and a niece that was almost like an extra child sometimes, who was just a few months older than her. So he had these two girls that wanted to dote on him all the time when he was a baby. And I would say, stop carrying him, put him down, let him crawl. Stop giving him everything, make him talk. Sometimes I just want to, for some parents, it's not the parents. We've also got to watch the siblings and the other people in that extended family who are providing and maybe over providing sometimes for the child, instead of letting them engage in what I call a little productive struggle. Right? Letting them figure it out. And how can I communicate? Because and I have to say, what was the title of the one chapter was No Child Ever Died from Crying? Or
No Child's Ever Died from Crying, as far as we've known, it's okay.
As far as we know. Well, there was that child I heard about that was locked in an airplane bathroom, a toddler locked in an airplane bathroom. I don't know if you heard about that.
I did not.
on a flight somewhere from China to somewhere, and people were just tired of hearing the child cry, and the parents wouldn't do anything. So other passengers took the kid and locked the kid in the bathroom on the airplane, which, I'm not laughing about what happened to the child, but that people are they're a little bit crazy sometimes. So, we do need to find some strategies to help our children learn to communicate in ways that won't drive everyone else around them crazy.
Oh, wow. I wonder what those parents did. The parents of the child.
Nothing at the time. There might have been a little bit of relief. I've been on airplanes with young parents or parents who've never flown with their children before and just don't know what to do. And so, it's like, I don't want to be that obnoxious other person on the plane who says, hey, your baby's probably crying because their ears are plugged. Because my ears, I have bad ears from too much flying and allergies. So my ears plug like crazy on the airplane, and it's painful. And I just think with a child who doesn't have the words to say, hey, my ears hurt and I can't unplug them, to let the parents know and give them, if they're still on a bottle, give them a bottle with just a little bit of water, something to suck so that their ears will pop. But they do make these special earplugs for flying, and they're great. You can get them from your ear doctor. They're sized for infants. That relieves the pressure so that they don't go through all of that. Anyhow, that's just my way too much travel on airplanes with crying infants. My other remedy for anyone who has that experience is Bose noise canceling headphones work just fine because we can't hear them cry when we have those headphones on.
Yeah.
I think about when my husband forgets his and I have mine, he'll nudge me and say, do you hear that baby crying? It's like, excuse me? No, I have my headphones. You forgot yours. We're good. We're good. But, you talked about wanting to work and serve the teachers who have the regular interactions with children, to either avoid. They don't need to have, not every child needs to have speech language therapy if we do that first tier of supports and instruction in the classroom, right? And I think about, as a teacher, I never had any supports for working with kids with any speech and language challenges. And it's, I didn't think about it until you said, I thought, no, I never got any. And whatever I did, I either had to figure out on my own or lean on our speech language pathologist that was there when we had one, because not every school has access to all those supports. And, as funding goes, sometimes we're losing more and more. When you talk about early intervention, especially for language development, I always think about, from my end, which is always the academic side, there was a study done by Hart and Riceley years ago, and their book was Meaningful Differences. I mean, it went into the amount of language a child hears from, birth to kindergarten. On the academic side, that language and the type of language that's used has a tremendous impact on how the child learns to read, write, and comprehend text and spoken language in the classroom. And we know that impacts their later abilities to read on grade level. But what is the connection there maybe between me, the academic side, and you on the speech side with the language that they hear in the home? How can parents speak to children to help improve their language as they develop and go into school?
Right. Absolutely. So I always tell parents, it's like learning a new language, right? You're hearing things for the first time. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes I say, just speak a little bit slower. So as I'm speaking to you now, I want your listeners to understand what I'm saying, right? So I'm not having a full speed conversation with you, because when I'm listening to something like a podcast and I'm not familiar with the person, if I'm hearing things too quickly, I might miss some of the information. So I want to make sure that the parents are speaking at a good pace and that they are also connected with the child, right? You want to make sure you have eye contact, you're in the proximity where the child knows you're communicating with them. My son, we've read books every night since he was a little baby, and he still every night will read a book, whether he is tired or not. If he's tired, he's like, Mom, can you please read it? But he loves hearing a book. He loves, looking at the pictures, seeing what the words are. And I think it's really important to communicate with your child at a very early age, right when they're babies, talk to them. The touch is really important. Letting them know like you're connected with them, that they connect with you, touching their face and body, and they can touch your face and your body, your hands, and talk about it. Singing is really important. I love connecting words to music, because words are language is on the left side of the brain and music is on the right. So when you blend those together, it helps to reinforce language and memory, and we're able to remember songs that we learned when we were little, right? But we can't remember a speech that you wrote for college or high school, whatever your last thing was, right? You're like, I'm not sure what I said exactly, but I can definitely remember the songs to this nursery rhyme, or like your favorite song from when you're in high school, right? So I think it's super important for that.
Hey there, Equity Warriors. I want to take a quick moment to share something exciting with you. You know how passionate I am about equity in education, right? Well, I've created a special space, a safe space, where we can dive even deeper into these crucial topics. It's our Patreon channel, and I'd love for you to join me there. Here's why it's so awesome. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll get access to exclusive content that I will not share anywhere else. I'm talking additional insights, workshops like you would get in regular professional learning sessions, resources that can really amplify your impact in education. But it's more than just extra content. By subscribing, you are directly supporting our mission. You're helping to create more valuable discussions and resources that you've come to love. You're part of the change we're making in educational systems. And let me tell you, our Patreon community, it is something special. It's a place where passionate educators and advocates can come together, share ideas, and drive real change. So if you're ready to take your commitment to educational equity to the next level, I'd be thrilled to have you join me. Just head over to patreon.com/3E podcast. That's patreon.com/3E podcast. Remember, your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue this important work. Together, we can create the educational system all our students deserve. Thanks for considering, and now let's get back to the episode. Wow, I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, it's like we can remember the jingles to ads, products from, when we were kids. I'm a lot older than you are. When I was a kid, the shows, the theme songs to the shows we watched on television, right? That's always fun. But that conversation that you had with someone a day ago, last week, and me, sometimes I think about, I'm sometimes in settings where I'm having to put out so much information, and somebody will say, you said something about, and I'll be like, I did? Can you give me a hint? They're like, it was 5 minutes ago. You just said. It's like, because our thoughts are going so quickly that we're not as cognizant about what we're saying. The words come out and it's out there and it's gone. I wonder about, as you say that as well, any damage that's done, especially in the early years, by putting kids on devices to entertain them, as opposed to having those meaningful conversations, even when the child can't answer, but just that, I'll say, mommy talk with a child. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think that, there's a place for electronics, right? Mm-hmm. They do learn some education from watching an educational show, because there are some great shows out there, but I do not like when a child is just placed in front of an electronic device for, hours or at a time as like a babysitter. I think that it's great when a child and a parent are both watching a show, and the parent can comment about it, can point things out, and then as the day goes on, maybe relate what they saw on the show to something in their environment, that they can generalize those ideas and concepts. But leaving a child with just electronics is not a great babysitter, right? And I've done it too. In the restaurant, you're like, okay, I need you to be quiet for a little while we finish eating. Here's your phone.
Here's a phone.
Yeah. Watch something. And I thought I would never be that parent, right? my nieces are a little bit older, and my brother would bring a portable DVD player to the restaurant. I'm like, why are you doing that? I don't understand. But now, as a parent myself, I'm like, now I get it. I get it. But it's so important to have actual play, right, with children, whether it be through items like a rattle, or what's it called, you push something and something happens, kind of toy. And having actual items and talking about them, making sounds, having animal toys and making animal sounds, because those are the first sounds that children are able to actually imitate, right? They're imitating babbles, they're imitating the intonation of things. And then the first things they're going to imitate would also be like animal sounds. So working on those are really important. And I remember
those old, I think they were called CNCs, where when I was a kid, you would pull the string. You needed something, you'd pull the string and it would make the sound.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they make those things anymore.
They do. It's like a lever thing now.
Okay, so now it's a lever, and not a string, because that probably it's long enough to hang yourself with. Probably not the safest thing for children. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but those are good to have.
Those are good to have. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You could also, because you could point it at something and say, what sound is it going to make? And then pull it and see what sound that is, or like, what should we point at next? And then have them point or something, have them feel like they are a part of that interaction.
Right. So we would say, in sort of teacher talk, that it was multimodal, or, you've got the tactile, you can touch it, you can see it, you can hear it, you can talk with it. So we're hitting all of those different things for parents who don't use that language of teachers. If they can touch it, see it, say it, hear it, every time we get another one of those senses involved, makes it better for the child, not just receive information from a boob tube, so to speak.
Yeah, multimodal. Yeah, multimodal. Yeah. That's what the concept is. And because it does reinforce, right? Because everybody learns differently, whether it's, some people are visual learners, some people are tactile learners, but when you incorporate all of that together, it helps to reinforce. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we know that children who are neurodiverse, who maybe have some identified speech challenges, that they will receive services. But what about children who go unidentified? What can either educators do just to make sure that the child's needs are served in their classrooms? How do they recognize even that there might be a need? But then also for parents who may not have someone that is identifying and that are concerned, how can parents advocate for their child?
Yeah, so between 0 and 3, all of the services would be free, right? But we need to identify it first, absolutely. And, I see a bunch of kids at a preschool. And so I work with the preschool, and we work at identifying what the milestones are for these kids at age 2, age 1.5 to 2 years old, 3 years old. What should they be doing at those milestones? And to be aware of what that child is doing. And if they see that a child is behind, to flag them and say, hey, can you screen this child for me? And then also bring it to the parents' attention. I think the education about what the language milestones is important for parents to know.
I was about to ask you about that. So can you give us one? My first concern is, what about parents whose children are not in a preschool?
Yeah.
Right. Or those, even they might be in preschool, but they don't have the services provided. So what's something that maybe a parent of a 2-year-old might want to be looking at or expecting to happen?
Yeah. So if you have a 2-year-old, you would expect them to have a lot of single words. And then at that point, they're going to be starting to combine 2 words together. So whether it's more please, bubbles, blow bubbles, up mama, open please, more cracker. Okay. You want to be combining a lot of the single words that they have together to start forming these little phrases. And then, by 1 year is the average to speak their first word, right? Their first meaningful word. That means they say the word with consistency, whether it be mama or dada or ball, or those are often the first words, right? And
besides no, I thought no was one of those.
Well, no is kind of, the 18-month, 2-year word. Once
Okay.
it's 2 years old, that's solidified.
Yeah.
And then they might say no forever.
Yes. Yeah. I guess
Yeah.
my daughter was abnormal, and I'm using that in a kind sense. When she was 8 months old, she was walking, and at 9 months old, she said, I too was one of those parents who read books all the time. I read a book to her, well, several books to her every single day. And so at 9 months old, she handed me a book, said, Mommy, read the book.
Wow.
And I about fell out the chair because I thought, you're not supposed to be able to speak in complete sentences yet. The kid hasn't shut up yet. She's 37 now. But my son, on the other hand, again, because everything was handed to him or done for him, I started to be a little bit concerned that he would be delayed, because when he was 18 months old, he was not speaking. Not much. I mean, it was one word here and a word there. And some of it I said, well, and this is something that you can help with the audience as well. We spoke 2 languages at home. I spoke in English. His dad always spoke to him, as much as I could make sure he did, in Spanish. And so he was having to assimilate those 2 languages. And when he did start to speak in phrases and sentences, they were often a combination of both languages. It straightened out by the time he was 6. But when you have parents or children who are working in multiple languages from a very early age, are the expectations a little bit different?
So a child is like a sponge, right? So if they are normal cognitively and developmentally, they should be able to learn as many languages as you can throw at them consistently until like 3 or 5 years old. That's kind of the age range. But you guys did a great job. You spoke English, and your husband spoke Spanish. So it's keeping that consistent, right? So one person is speaking consistently one language, and the other parent is speaking consistently another language. Sometimes when people are kind of mixing it all together, that becomes a little bit more difficult. But if a child is normal developing, they should be able to learn how to speak both languages fine, or even trilingual or more than that as well. And they'll also know who to speak that language to, right? We have some children who come in. We have a lot of ESL kids who come in and their primary language is Spanish, right? I'm in Los Angeles, so a lot of Spanish speakers will come in, but then they're placed in an English-speaking school.
Yeah.
So these kids might be normal developing, and they know how to speak Spanish well, but then they go through what they call a silent period. So they might go through this period where they're not speaking very much at all. It's because they're kind of figuring out what to do with this new English language that they're learning, and also how to keep that Spanish language as well. So there are those kids who will go through the silent period for a couple months, but then kids are resilient. They can, if they're normal developing and everything, cognitively they're fine, they should be able to learn those 2 languages very well.
Yeah. My dream education system, what I think every school should have, is dual immersion from the time a child comes into school, so that they are learning to operate, read, write, think, calculate, be literate, be biliterate, be multiliterate, and multilingual from the time that they are very small. And I know that happens all over the rest of the world, but just not in the United States. And it just drives me nuts that we don't respect and value that multilingualism is such a gift for children to have. So I always encourage parents, if you have, if it's grandma or grandpa or an aunt or an uncle or somebody who still speaks a mother tongue from somewhere, to make sure that they are always talking to your child in that language, so that they do develop both languages.
Yeah, there are, a handful of schools here in Los Angeles that are doing Spanish dual language, or even like Mandarin and things like that. But they're far and few between. They're just not readily available. And, I'm like 4th generation Chinese from Hawaii. So I don't speak any Chinese dialects, and I'm so sad I wish I did.
Yeah. It's not too late.
It's not too late, but it's so much harder with all those tones as an adult. And I'm trying to learn Spanish. I got a notification that I've been doing Duolingo for 9 years, and I'm like, why am I not fluent by now? It's hard. I'm not consistent with it. I don't have anybody to really practice.
It is difficult. I'll say, when when I was married to my first husband, that's my son's father who spoke Spanish, because I was around his family all the time, I used my Spanish. I could speak, I could understand what people were saying. And then once I gave him the boot, I stopped using my Spanish as much. So now having to, using my Spanish in the Dominican, which is a different, very different Spanish from California Mexican Spanish, it's the accent is different. A lot of the words are, especially the sort of slang and more common language. And then culturally, how the language is used is very different. So it's almost a new Spanish, getting my ear tuned to hear it. Like you talk about the tonal languages, the Asian languages that rely so much on tone and pitch for meaning, are very difficult. So we can still do it. There's still some neuroplasticity in our brain that will help us do that. It's just not going to be as easy as when we were children.
Yeah, no, when I worked at a hospital in East LA and as a speech therapist, and I did use my Spanish at work, but it was simple work speech therapy Spanish. I could get through my evaluations and things, but my son's father, he practices Spanish. He does Rosetta Stone, and he speaks Spanish, but Spanish well enough. He just doesn't use it often. And whenever I try to speak Spanish in front of him, he's like, "Your accent is horrible." I'm like, "Oh, it's not. They don't build you up."
Well, fortunately, my accent in the Dominican is great. They always think I am Dominican, and because the accent is so close to theirs, they just think I'm a very well-educated Dominican. That's that monitor again to make sure that I do it just right. Then they just start to rattle off stuff at 100 miles an hour. And I'll be like, wait, it's better that I cannot understand you when you speak that quickly. So it takes some time and practice, but I'll encourage you, keep speaking your Spanish, no matter what your accent sounds like. It's better that, two languages. I'll say speaking a second language poorly is still better than not speaking a second language at all. Because it does help us cognitively and more in mathematics than people would like to think. So that's why I always tell teachers, if you have children who are multilingual, encourage that multilingualism, because it does so much more in their brains, not just for communication, but for information processing, for calculating in mathematics. It's a gift that we should be nurturing, not something that we should be tearing down because of, more than anything, because of politics. Schools, classrooms, interventions. Are there things that schools could do that would help to integrate speech and language into regular curriculum? I know normally, especially with children who are identified, they have a pull-out and they'll go for therapy. But I think about our schools, talking about multilingualism, we have children who are coming to school speaking not just other heritage languages like Spanish or Chinese, but speaking sociocultural languages. You're in LA, there's a huge population of children who speak Chicano English. There's a large population of children who speak African American English. So having something built into their curriculum and the practices in class, some strategies maybe that will help when teachers hear. I'm always very careful about how I say this. I'm actually writing a book on the topic. Not to say that children are mispronouncing English because they hear a certain phoneme pronounced a certain way, or because the tongue doesn't go a certain place, but to instead work on developing the articulation that would be school English. Are there things that they can do routinely? English.
I would say that like dialectical differences, right? So in Hawaii, we have Pidgin, Hawaiian Creole English. Yes. And so we have these kids who speak Pidgin. And, I grew up in Hawaii, and people always say I speak private school Pidgin because I don't speak it very well. I don't know. Anyway, so I think modeling, a school English is really important, but being able as educators to also have the ear for these different dialects, because as educators, we should know a little bit more about what these children are saying culturally in their society and socially, so I think it's better for us to be able to understand it ourselves, be educated on that, and then be able to model back what the school English should be, or what we feel that would not so much we need to correct how they speak totally, but how they can articulate themselves better to sound more educated, right? Because a lot of times these slang and dialects, they are looked down upon because they don't sound educated. But doesn't mean that these kids are not smart. They just need to know how to code switch. Switch. And I think learning how to code switch is very important because it opens you up to a greater audience, but also keeps you relatable to your culture when you are able to talk to the people from that you can have a slang conversation with.
Yeah, your family, your community, your neighbors. Yeah. And for some kids, really just to be able to not just survive, but to thrive in the neighborhoods that they live in, because it's not always up to the child about where they live. Give us, I'm trying to think from your book, what's maybe a big one or two, your favorite takeaways from the book, something that you think everybody should know and a reason that they should pick up your book?
Yeah, one of the big things that I try to educate parents and teachers, caregivers on is don't ask a yes/no question unless you are ready to honor that no. Right? I learned this very early on, and it was one of the biggest lessons that I learned because, oftentimes we ask kids, "Are you ready to clean up? Are you ready to work? Are you ready to do this? Are you ready to do that? Can you say this? Do you want to do this?" And they'll say no, right? And be like, okay, well, you can't force them to do it. You can't be like, well, you're going to do that anyway, So you need to watch how you are posing questions. So I might ask them, I might offer choices. I'll tell my son, okay, we're going to get ready for bed. Do you want to brush your teeth first or change into pajamas first? Or we're going to do these two things. Which one do you want to do first? Or we're going to do these two things. Which one do you want to do last? Or we're going to have a snack. Do you want an apple or an orange? And I'll show, kids, because they don't know vocabulary unless they're experiencing it, right? I like to show them shoulder width apart so you're not holding it too close together, right? So that you can see, even if a child's not verbal, you can see where they're looking. And they can say, oh, you want an apple? Great, let's eat an apple. I'm going to cut it first. And I do like to do language bombardment and kind of build upon, this is a vocabulary term, and then build a phrase and build a sentence and so on. For articulation kids, especially when you want them to imitate, I'm not going to say, can you say caterpillar? I might say caterpillar, you say it, or your turn, or I might say a sentence, say it's your turn, you say it. Yeah. And, kids like to feel that they are smart. So another thing you could do is ask absurd questions. So I like to be like, does a dog say baba? Or does a giraffe have a long nose? So you can ask absurd questions about things. Or, one kid, he was trying to tell me something yesterday about a book. And I kind of had an idea of what he was talking about, but he was a little bit shy. So I was asking him absurd questions about the book. Like, is the dog going to do such and such? And it was absolutely the wrong thing, and then he would smile and he'd be like, no. So finally he was able to become more verbal and then, explain himself a little bit better. And like, oh, that's what you meant. You meant that blah, 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 so it's like having to play dumb because kids love to be smart. Kids love when they're smarter than you. And they love when you are silly and animated and over the top. And I always tell parents, don't be afraid to be absolutely silly because kids, love to play. Kids have great imagination and we lose that as adults, right? We don't play as much. We don't imagine as much. And it's like a muscle that we need to work on. If we don't work at playing, if we don't work on imagination, we are stuck being adults and doing our everyday things and being very stringent. And children aren't stringent, they are pliable, and we need to help to mold them.
Yeah. You did two things that sort of took me back to a program that I used, that I trained on teachers around North America, Central America, anyhow, wherever. And one of the things we did was, as you said, do that model. Listen, with us, it's my turn to say, I'll say a word. It's caterpillar. Listen to me say that word again, caterpillar. Now you say it with me. And we would do, several of say it with me, say it with me. Oh, you're good. Now it's your turn. You do it by yourself. So sometimes with parents needing to know that we've got to do these things with people. I think about my son, one of his Spanglish words was milky leche. He never said milk purely. He never said leche purely until he was 5. That word was milky leche. And it didn't matter who he said it to. But I didn't know at that time to say, look, milk, and shake the carton and have him say, ask him, say milk, say, I want some milk. Do you want some milk? Because now I'm trying to think, don't have him say the yes or no question, no yes or no answer, right? But to really make him sort of force him into one language or the other, or ask him in Spanish if he would like some milk. And then the other thing, you talked about absurdities, and I used a program that had a whole track of absurdities that we use with 3 and 4-year-olds. And so with my grandson, leading into what I knew, taught him from that program. And my daughter was not very happy when he asked when she asked him if he wanted to clean his room, and he said that would be absurd, because what we had taught them, things like, would you paint a house with a fork? And the kids would say, no, that would be absurd. Once they understood what, certain tools were used for certain things, he was like, no, he just deadpan. That would be absurd. So we watched those absurdities. But it's so fun to see kids learn language and learn how to use language and understand the use of language as they get into that.
Yeah, and you find that they are able to take what you are teaching them and then apply it to their own language. I had this one little boy, because I'd be like, oh, is this a tiger? And he'd be like, no. So he'd ask me, he goes, is this a butterfly? No. And so he was being the teacher, which was so cute. Yeah. And they just,
they love to be the teacher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kids love to do that. Oh my gosh. Okay. We sort of talked about technology, but is there, we were really talking about don't park kids on devices when it's not academic. Are there any emerging trends? People always want to know about how can I leverage technology? Are there any emerging trends in language development or speech and language pathology where technology can be leveraged?
Yeah, I think that there are some great interactive games or interactive programs. Like there was one that I use with some of my kids. It's the PBS. PBS, they have a game. They have a game app. And there's one Daniel Tiger tea party that I used a number of times with some children. And it has a tea party, and you can, we talked about, oh, look, everybody has their tea and everybody has their snack. And then who's going to drink their tea? And you have to touch it in order to make somebody drink the tea. Who drank tea? Oh, let's pour more tea. So it's a little bit about, social things and how to have a little party and how to be the host of the party. And let's pick the snack. What snack do you want? Or what tea set do you want? What tablecloth do you want? And then we can bring that also into real life. So, another time I might bring a tea set or something and say, oh, let's set it up and have little dolls or other things, toys that could be part of our party and relate it that way. So I think some of the interactive language games and toys are really important to use, and then generalizing it into the actual functional setting. That'd be great.
I'm going to guess because it's PBS, is it free?
I believe it is, yeah.
So that's something that any parent who hears this, or if you happen to know a parent who might benefit from these resources, text them this episode so that they can hear what they can do with their child. That's for everybody who's listening. I have one last question for you. Dr. Angela Davis said, I am changing the things I cannot accept. And I think about, moms maybe like yourself who have children who are neurodiverse or may have a disability and their struggles, as well as educators who may have children in their classrooms and may need support and assistance in providing supports to those children. So what is the something that you cannot accept? And then how can our listeners help support change in that area?
Yeah, the disparity of education, the lack of education to parents and caregivers, educators, I think there's so little of it that is out there that, if we could close that gap, it'd be really important. I was talking to a friend who works at a nonprofit, and they have a lot of homeless, young adults who have young children. And these young single moms and parents, they just are not educated in the way to teach language. And so I think that's one area where I could be of use, right? I'm going to be speaking with them. But if we could spread the word and create greater education amongst everybody who works with young children, I think it would literally change the world, because we would have confident speakers. We would have hopefully less children that need speech therapy, and just more people that are aware of how important it is to interact with our youth.
Yeah. Beautiful. Your book, again, is Play Dumb and Sabotage, right? That is also your website, playdumandsabotage.com.
Sabotage.
All right.
Yes, exactly.
So that's how you find her. That's how you find the book. Is the book available in bookstores everywhere? Amazon?
Yep. It's available on Amazon. I think most online bookstores. It's also available as a Kindle, as a ebook in most places as well, and as an audiobook on either Audible, or you could find it, I think, on Spotify and other places that have audiobooks as well. So you can find it.
Are you the reader of your audiobook?
I am not, only because I would have loved to, but I did not. I would have had to book a studio and have some edit it for me, and the time management of it was better to hire somebody. But I did get somebody who I thought did very well with the material, and she had read another book about autism as well for another author. So I thought she had a really great connection with the book, and I'm happy with it. It's good.
Okay. All right. I just thought we would get to hear your lovely voice a little bit more. But Janeen, thanks so much for joining me today. Equity warriors out there, it's always time for you to take some action. So empower those young voices in your community. Share the language development strategies you heard today with parents, teachers, and caregivers, or just text them a link to this episode and they can hear it for themselves. Visit playdumandsabotage.com to get more resources, join the mailing list, and then let's work together to make sure that every single child has the opportunity to develop strong communication skills. So share the episode, start conversations, be the change in early language intervention, because your actions today can help shape a more equitable educational future for all children. And then join me again next episode. And if you've got a question, a topic you'd like covered, or a special request, look down in the notes, click that link and text that right to me. I do want to continue to hear your stories. And then remember, don't worry about the things you cannot change. Change the things you can no longer accept. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the 3E Podcast. Now, here's how you can make a real difference. First, smash that subscribe button. It's free. It's easy. Just do it. Second, share the show with anyone you know who cares about education. And third, consider becoming a supporter of the show. Together, we're not just talking about change, we're making it happen. Make a donation today to be part of that mission and change, and I'll catch you next time.